When the Tesla Model 3 was introduced to the world all the way back in 2017, it was an absolute sensation. This was going to be the affordable family sedan that doubled as a performance vehicle that could also do something other vehicles couldn't, at least electric vehicles, which was take a road trip. Because not only was there already a Tesla supercharger network, but that network was expanding, and any other electric vehicle you purchased did not have a manufacturer-backed charging network. If you were an early reservation holder, if you were an early owner of a Tesla Model 3, your gamble has paid off pretty well. But I'm probably not alone in seeing that this vehicle needs some attention. And it's been 7 years, but it's finally received that attention. It is the Tesla Model 3 Highland, as it was known on the internet for months and months, but now it's just called the upgraded 2024 Tesla Model 3. And I finally had a chance to get behind the wheel, get my hands on the vehicle, and I wanted to bring you along and show you what's changed, what hasn't, and whether or not you should consider this over the other vehicles in this segment, or if you have a Tesla Model 3, is it worth making an upgrade? We'll start here at the front of the vehicle where it's received a well-deserved facelift. It's gone from child star with some baby fat to a leading role with a chiseled jawline. The big star of the show is going to be up in the headlights. We have a single unit containing your daytime running lights, your turn signals, and your headlights all being LED. But what we don't have, not just in the rear-wheel drive model, but in any model at this point, is a fog light that you would have found in the lower part of the bumper. Now, for some folks, this might not make a difference. I know for me, I don't have it on my Model 3, but it is something that I would be interested in adding because I do get quite a bit of fog. If you don't find yourself needing that fog light, then I think this is going to be a welcome change, because very few are going to say that your headlights resemble something more scaly, either on the frog side of the family or all the way down to a fish, because overall this is a much sleeker design and it carries itself across the entire bumper. Within the wheel arch here, there are quite a few other changes that are going to be much more noticeable for those in the car than those outside. Visually, there isn't a whole lot different here. We have an 18-inch wheel standard with an aero cover that is removable and does have a dark gray alloy wheel underneath, and a 19-inch wheel is still optional for those who want it. But the bigger difference is going to be within these tires, which are now not just quieter, but also a little bit lower performance. Along with the wheels and tires, the suspension has been retweaked to make it a more compliant ride. Now, whether that means it's softer or more composed, however you want to put it, it's more comfortable. And I haven't had all day to spend with it, which is why we don't have official ratings yet. But I can tell you that based on the ride I took to get here, which is my own Model 3, it was both quieter and more comfortable. And what's going on here is one of the biggest reasons. You'd be forgiven if you take a look at the Model 3 from the side and think this is basically the same car that you've seen on the road for years, because to my eye, this silhouette is exactly the same. Maybe the front end is a little pointier from the side, but it's not just the shape, but the overall dimensions that are almost exactly the same as we've seen year over year. One of the biggest reasons for that is what's happening underneath the vehicle. For the rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive models, we are seeing the exact same running gear that we saw in previous years. Same battery, same motors, same wheelbase, all of that has been essentially untouched. And that's one of the reasons that right now, this Model 3 is not eligible for that federal tax credit. Whatever they've been using just doesn't meet the current requirements. That is, unless they make some changes later on in the year, but as I film this in February of 2024, unfortunately, neither of these are eligible. What I haven't mentioned and is worth mentioning now is the Performance Model 3, which at the moment doesn't exist. Unless it's a 2023 that just happens to still be available for sale, we have not gotten an upgraded, refreshed Highland Performance Model 3, at least to this point. And at Auto Buyer's Guide, we are hoping that when that vehicle does have the sheet removed, it is a little bit more than a visual change. See, the Performance model has usually had some bigger wheels, slightly different brakes, and maybe a rear spoiler. But if rumors and spy shots are correct, we're going to see some different seating, and we're also hoping that we see some different software changes to make this not just a great 0 to 60 vehicle, but a great car in the corners. because in this segment, which is admittedly an unusual segment, we have cars like the Polestar 2, which are all electric and all-wheel drive and have a performance model, but are a lot more fun in the twisties than what we get from the Tesla offering. Around back, we see the final changes to the visual update that we saw on the front end, with everything getting a little bit sharper. Across the back here, the rear integrated spoiler is going to be a little bit more noticeable, but we'll also find that these taillights are a little bit sharper than what we found in the outgoing model. Not only are they a little bit sleeker, like I said, a little sharper edge, but they're also a single piece, where previously it was a split unit. If we open this tailgate, you'll see that the lights go with it, and while the opening remains essentially the same, instead of having the previous model's half light over here, we have an unusual shelf, which for a moment might seem like a great place to put a drink if you're mixing around here in the trunk, but I would be one who forgets it when I close the trunk and find out when I either have a squish bottle or a bit of a chip here on the inside of the paint. Between the rear lights, we also get a bit of a badging change. Instead of the central Tesla logo that we see not only on the front of the vehicle, but also the previous model year, we now have Tesla spelled out in its own font. And this underneath that sharper spoiler with the more aggressive taillights and this slightly reshaped, redesigned lower part of the bumper makes this whole thing seem a little bit wider. And again, the dimensions are essentially identical. I don't mind a wider look, especially if it's just a few visual tweaks, because this vehicle looked a little bit bubbly. And for those who aren't looking for something as cute, the opposite of cute's a little bit more aggressive, and I think this definitely is leaning that direction. One other thing to note down here at the lower part of the bumper, because obviously there's no exhaust to talk about, we do have a change in some of the functions of these rear lights. Now, since this is a single piece, that means that when this trunk is up, we have no rear lighting. That's not reverse lights, that's not your blinkers, and that's most important in an emergency situation, which is what some of the federal regulations are about. So if we open this trunk and we have either our turn signal or our emergency flashers on, that duty will then be designated to these lights so that we do meet federal regulations. Small changes, but something worth noting. Now, since the overall shape hasn't really changed and this is still designed to be a family sedan, the trunk space is going to be incredibly important to those who are purchasing the car. And I am pleased to say that there is a whole lot of room here still. We have a very wide opening. The only thing we can't reach as far as the maximum space is what's going to be just behind the wheel arches here, where we do get a couple little pockets. But the rest of the space is perfect for, well, in this case, I've got a couple carry-on size luggage items. We could do those, well, at least about 4 or 5 more without issue. And we have a lower storage space that can still be accessed with those luggage items pushed a little bit further. And this is great for at least one bag of its own, or if you don't like to use the front trunk, this is still going to be a great spot to put your charging cable. It is worth noting that when you purchase this vehicle, there is no vehicle charging equipment included. So at the time of purchase, you can either purchase a mobile connector or a home wall connector. However, the one thing you do get, which I think is probably most important for those who do not have an electric vehicle up to this point, is that you do get the adapter for the J1772 to NACS/J3400 charge connector. Moving to the interior of the Model 3, we have the black interior here with a couple different levels on the door panel. The very top and the armrests are going to be a synthetic leather. It is going to be padded, so nice and comfortable with a little bit of accent stitching. We have the light pipe, which is very difficult to see here. I'll see if I can get a little bit of light to show up. Should be pink. If not, I'll go ahead and throw in the around section. This ambient light is controlled from the touchscreen and runs all the way from the back doors, through the front doors, and across the dashboard. Under the light, we have a nice little chrome-ish accent and a fabric that's new for the Model 3, and we'll see in the door inserts in the front and rear, as well as across the dashboard. Storage cubby down below, approximately the same size as we found in the outgoing model, but this time it's lined with a felt material. So if you do have things in there, they'll make a little less noise because they won't be rubbing up against plastic. And in the very bottom corner of the door, you'll find one of the speaker grills. Now we're in the rear-wheel drive base model, so this has 9 speakers, which is the same as the outgoing model. The upgraded all-wheel drive long range will have 17 speakers, and that has added 2 from the outgoing Model 3. Moving up to the dashboard, we have the same synthetic leather material here, still nice and soft to the touch. That's going to go just before the glove box. But above that, where we have our air conditioning or heat coming from, this slot used to be a little bit less pronounced, and now it's a little bit more highlighted by this fabric material that we saw in the door. Now, this material just adds a little bit more dimension to the inside of this Model 3, and while it's less subtle than it was previously, I think it's a nice touch. I think it's well implemented. Up the rest of the dashboard, you can see just on the edges here that light bar running all the way across, and the rest of it being a nice flat, fairly soft material, which is a nice upgrade from the previous generation. Everything that happens in a Model 3 happens on a screen, and in most cases it's this touchscreen, but we'll cover that in just a few moments. Just as a reminder to folks, behind the steering wheel there is neither a display nor heads-up display. So moving back to the center screen is where you make all of your adjustments, except for things, I suppose, like the seat adjustment. So from our main controls, this is where when you get in the vehicle, you set up your mirrors and your steering wheel, generally set to a driver profile. In this case, we're not going to go ahead and set one, but I do have everything set and I've been fairly comfortable in it. We can also make small changes like our Sentry mode, whether the car is watching or not watching at specific moments. Things like fold your mirrors can not only be done here on the touchscreen, but they can also be done with a voice command. Pedals and steering are also adjusted here. You can change how quickly the vehicle accelerates. You can also change how it slows down. That's going to be your regenerative braking. You'll find that a little bit further in the menus. Moving down into things like our autopilot. Now, the vehicle comes standard with autopilot. You can purchase an enhanced autopilot for $6,000 or a full self-driving for $12,000. If you have further questions about those systems and what they're capable of, hold tight, because we do have a video coming out very soon about autopilot in 2024, full self-driving in 2024, and what those systems look like. We will throw a description down in the video as soon as we have that out and available, either here on Auto Buyer's Guide or our sister channel, EV Buyer's Guide. One of the biggest changes you'll find when you jump into a Tesla is that you no longer have manual vent controls. You have a slot style vent that runs across the entirety of the vehicle. And if you want to make adjustments to that, you do so in the infotainment screen. Not only do we change our temperature on the left or right side, depending on who's in the vehicle and how you want to set things up, but where you want your air to flow is controlled by your fingertips here. So this is going to set the air in one column. If I split it, it'll split into two columns, and I can go ahead and adjust where that's blowing. I tend to like not air directly in my face, so I'll split that a little bit wider and have it coming just about shoulder level. If I want to reduce my energy consumption, I can set my temperature to a lower level. I have mine set to about 66 right now, and I can go ahead and turn on my heated seat. Heated seats have been standard in Teslas for quite a while, but what you haven't found in the Model 3 is a cooled seat. So these seats are now heated and ventilated from the factory on every single model. Now we're going to pull back just a little bit because the steering wheel comes into play, because one of the biggest changes to the Model 3 is that we no longer have any stocks. If you have a column shifter, normally your drive stock is over here. If you're any other vehicle in the world, you have your turn signals behind the wheel over here. But in this case, our turn signals are now right here, and they are a haptic feedback button. As you can see, the driver display shows the camera view off to the rear. It is worth noting that these cameras are a little bit better than the previous models. But if you want to put the vehicle in drive, you now have to go back to this screen, and on the left furthest edge, you can slide up for drive, down for reverse. You can press and hold for neutral. May not let me do it here because I'm not moving yet. And to put it in park, you tap at the very top. This is going to be a change that not everybody likes, and it's certainly going to take some adjustment no matter what you've been driving. I drive a Model 3 just about every day, and getting in this one, I still have to remember how to make these adjustments. It's not going to be for everyone. I do think it's something that I could adjust to, but I don't think it was necessarily the right decision or worth it to get rid of those driver stocks to free up a little bit of space. I will admit it's a nice and clear look from the driver's seat, but I wouldn't have minded a couple of those extra features still in place. If you don't want to slide up and down here on the screen, or perhaps your screen is malfunctioning, you can go up here and decide whether you want park, reverse, neutral, or drive. So press for drive. Here we go. Press for reverse. Press for park. Now this definitely seems a little gimmicky to me, but if you are having issues with your touchscreen, or you want to pretend you're in a fighter jet and get up here and do some of the controls, I suppose you can do that. But generally a fighter jet is going to have a mechanical switch up here and not a touch button. We'll come back to that steering wheel now. Like I mentioned, this is a little bit of a different shape, and we do have a cutout here, which does help lead to more of an airy feeling from that driver's seat and from the driver view. We have our turn signals left and right over here, as well as our light button. So you can do that to turn lights on or turn on your brights. On the right side here, we have our windshield wipers, our voice commands, which you might end up using more often than you think for different functions that are now touch controls. And the right and left scroll wheels are still going to be designated for your music mainly, and your adaptive cruise control, autopilot, full self-driving functions. Up here in the A-pillar, we do have another speaker grill, but there's also the addition of a blind spot monitoring light. So tucked right about here is a red light if there's someone on the left side, same thing for the right side. This has always been visible on the driver display, but now we have it a little bit more in our line of sight. And here in the driver's door, we have our door release, the electronic one, our manual just in case, and then our window switches. Underneath that main screen, we have 2-phone wireless charging. This is a Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, so you will be able to fit a large phone in this space, and it will charge both. We also have a redesigned center console. This redesign is fairly minor, but this all now matches up with the higher end Teslas, Model S and Model X. If we slide this forward, we have a storage cubby down below that also has a cigarette power outlet. Push that back and slide the second tray back to expose our cup holders. These are in the same place as they were, but now we have the option to cover it up if you want to. And as we move into the center armrest, we can lift this up and see that there's a little bit of storage in here, not a whole lot. It does come back under this piece, but just a little bit extra for maybe some napkins or a book. We'll crawl into the back momentarily, but it is worth noting that this is still the roof. Not just standard, but the only roof option for the Model 3. So it's all glass in the front and all glass in the rear. You can see there that line is where the tinting ends there in the back. But if you do want something that's fully covered, the Model 3 is going to be essentially fully open. And if you want an inserted shade, you have to buy that separately, and it is manual, not automated. Now moving into the back, we see that the door design is very similar to what we get in the front. We have our soft touch synthetic leather here. We have the stripe that runs all the way across this door. And then we have our fabric insert, which is where you'll also find the rear speaker here in the base rear wheel drive system, and a storage cubby that's lined just like it is in the front. The biggest change to the rear is going to be found here in what used to just be the vents and the charging ports, but now we have a full screen that can control a number of things, not just for the rear passengers, but for the whole vehicle. Since this is a dual zone, not 3-zone climate control, the passengers in the rear can either turn off the air or change where it's blowing, and you can control that air direction just like you can for the front of the vehicle. You can also change over and control your heated seats, which are always nice to have. If you have children back here and you don't want them playing with all of this, it can be locked from the front seat. They can also change the music, turn on their own entertainment. So you're signed in Netflix, Hulu, your YouTube, if you want to watch your favorite YouTubers. Go ahead and make sure you're subscribed to the internet connectivity plan that comes from Tesla, but once you are, you're able to do so. You can even go ahead and play games back here. I do believe, not that I carry it with me, that you can Bluetooth connect a controller, so the kids are able to do all of this from a controller sitting in either of the rear seats. Just below that screen, we'll see the vent opening, again similar to what we find in the front of the vehicle, and we do still have USB-C charging. It's just tucked a little bit further back. In the back of the seat, we do see another small change, which is that the cubby pocket here is no longer a fabric pocket, but it is a single piece that can be pulled back, have items stored in it. It does make it a little bit less flexible, but probably a little bit more secure and will likely wear a little bit better than that fabric, which can probably get stretched out. Going back here into the center screen is something that I was a little bit surprised to find, but it sort of speaks to one of the things that this vehicle can be very good at, which is as a rideshare vehicle. So from the rear here, again, this can be turned off. You can move the seat of the main passenger. I don't know why you would want to, but you can slide it all the way back in a full recline. What it's more useful, I think, is if you happen to be a rideshare driver and you want to give your passengers more space, they can go ahead and move this seat essentially all the way up if they want to create a ton of rear leg room. It's not something I would have expected to see in this vehicle, but it really is software, so why not put it in? When it comes to rear passenger room, there is more than you might expect. So I have this seat set up for myself. See if I can get a good angle here. I do have about an inch or two between me and the seat, so I do fit. I just don't have a lot of wiggle room. One thing I don't have is a lot of thigh support. So the fact that this is a battery electric vehicle and it's not taller means that we're sitting pretty close to that battery, which means that the seat just ends up that much lower to the ground and my legs and knees end up just a little bit higher. Now, I don't find myself in the back seat very often of most vehicles, but as I mentioned, I'm 6 feet tall. I have shorter legs, which means I have a much taller torso. Normally about a 6'4" person would have the same height torso as I do. And if I look up here, if I go all the way up, I will touch the ceiling. But if I sit in a more natural position, I do actually have room, maybe an inch or so. But in a pinch, if you need to fit people back here, you certainly can. It's just if you need to move larger people on a regular basis, this would be a little bit tight. One thing that's very nice to have for rear passengers is an armrest. We have good armrests on the left and right side outboard, but in the center here, if I pull down from the headrest, which is a change from the outgoing model, this will fold on down, and I've got a nice good armrest here with 2 cup holders. This blends in with the redesign on the interior, and it's a small piece, but moving the access to this to the headrest makes it a whole lot easier to pick up, put down, and ultimately utilize. Now, as I mentioned, one of the biggest changes to the driving experience in this car is to get it driving. So on the main display here, you simply slide up for drive or down for reverse. It takes a little getting used to, a little bit of an adjustment period, but so far I haven't missed it too many times. The biggest adjustment so far has really been the turn signals, and that's where things have gotten a little bit more confusing than I would prefer. I do think it's something that in time will be easy to adjust to, but no matter what you're coming from, turn signals are turn signals, and they've been the same since the beginning of turn signals, just about. I know that for me, I keep my left hand on the wheel more often than my right hand. I call it kind of a throwback to the manual transmission days where I was actually shifting my own gears, but those buttons are still not the most convenient. I'd almost just prefer, if we wanted to clear up some space, if we had just a little paddle on the back that shifted up or down. Now, one of the reasons that we don't have that is probably just to simplify the manufacturing process. Probably saves a few dollars to make it a button instead of a physical lever, but that would have been my preference if we wanted to clear up the space and still have the functionality. From the driver's seat, one of the things I can say for sure is that this is a more comfortable ride, and that's for a number of different reasons. The seats themselves are shaped a little bit different. It feels like they're a little more open. There's a little less squeeze, at least on these models. We'll see what happens on the performance model if, when, and as we see it. But in the meantime, this has just been a little bit more comfortable for myself. I was able to find a good position that was reminiscent of what I had on the car I got here with, but still felt a little bit different. Then the reach to the steering wheel, again, very similar, the range of motion, but that steering wheel does feel a little bit different. It maybe just feels a little bit smaller, which makes it feel a little more go-karty to me. That's not a bad thing. I love a good go-kart. And if this wants to have a little bit more of a fun feel, that might be a good way to do it. I could also see an argument for making it a little bit smaller, take up a little less space in the cabin, if the cabin is meant to feel a little bit more airy. This particular model had the ambient lights turned to auto. I went ahead and turned those on, set it to a nice purple, and for the current weather, which is a really nice dark gray, I think that purple does a really nice job to just make things a little bit more pleasant here in the cabin. If it were an option on my car when I bought it, I probably would have paid for it. You know, probably not more than a few $100s, but if it was part of a larger package, that would have made sense. It is nice now that it comes as a standard feature. It is customizable, adjustable, something that people really enjoy when they're looking at their own vehicle. And the fact that you can make it a wide variety of colors is also a nice touch. As I mentioned, the weather is gray right now, and it's been gray all day. It's certainly heated seat weather, but I did test out the ventilation, and especially going from heated to cooled, the transition was very quick, and I do think when you find yourself in a hotter situation, it is definitely going to be a feature you'll be glad you have. I just pulled away from a stoplight where I went ahead into the touchscreen to make a couple changes. One of those was turning on the auto steer function, which the vehicle has to be in park to do so. What I can say is that making that change happened very quickly and pretty easily. Once the vehicle was slowed down, the driver gear selector, as it were, slid off onto the screen. I went ahead and selected park, went in, changed my menu, and then slid the vehicle back in drive, and I was off and ready to roll. What hasn't been as easy is the turn signals. I keep finding myself looking for them with my left hand, and they're not there. As soon as I figure out they're not there, then the switch is to go ahead and find the button, and that's not a problem. But I keep finding myself having to think about which button is which. The up and down is still the same. Right is up and left is down, but it's just such a different action that it takes a little bit longer than I would like to make that change. I don't think it's a safety hazard. I don't think it's a critical malfunction. I can just tell you at this moment, I don't think I like it a whole lot. I'm on the freeway at this point, but to get here, I went through quite a few back roads, and boy, were they bumpy. That asphalt was far from pristine. And what I can tell you is that this ride is a lot less jarring than it was when I did this test route in my own car a little bit earlier. One of the biggest complaints with the Tesla Model 3 was that it had a jarring ride, and jarring is not how I would describe this moving forward. You might still feel it in the seat, but you're not going to feel it in your back. And for me, that's a huge improvement, and for many, I think it's enough to reconsider a car that they may have written off because of that discomfort. That improved ride quality comes down to a combination of tires as well as suspension. Now with an 18-inch wheel, you're going to get a little bit more tire, a little more sidewall, and that's always my preference, even though it may not be the most aesthetically pleasing. That's what I have on my car, so this one being the same tire size is a great head-to-head comparison because I do have a very good baseline for what the previous 18-inch tire felt like. I'm not sure I would go ahead and trade in my car because I've only had it for a year, but I wouldn't mind if there was a suspension upgrade option, and depending on the price, I may consider that one. Not that I expect it to happen, but just to say that I do think it's a noticeable improvement and probably worth the money. One thing I would be interested in taking a look at was this quieter tire, and while that seems to be an easy thing to throw on, I think my car's top speed is over the rated speed of those tires, and that would make it an issue because most manufacturers or shops will not put on a tire that's not rated to handle what your vehicle is capable of. I do wonder, in a world of software updates, if that's something that could be addressed by Tesla. If I said that I wanted that different tire, could they go in and adjust my top speed, because I would happily pay miles per hour for quieter ride. It looks like I'm going to spend the rest of my time behind the wheel stuck here in traffic, but it's at least a great opportunity to pass all the busy work off to autopilot. Please do not let anyone tell you that this is a hands-free system, because it most certainly isn't, but as I have a lot of experience behind the wheel here, I'm comfortable enough to be able to at least talk on camera and know that I'm less likely to get in an accident than if I didn't have this system activated. This may not be the most fun way to test a vehicle, but I can tell you that this is the way it's going to be utilized most of the time. Is your basic commute, is sitting in traffic, and it's one of the best parts about an electric vehicle is that this sitting in traffic is just a little bit easier, it's quieter, it should be more comfortable, and where the Model 3 used to not quite meet that level of comfort, this update certainly does. This rear-wheel drive model did not get an upgrade in performance, nor range, nor sound quality. But because everything is quieter, because everything is just a little bit nicer, it really does feel like a whole lot nicer base model. And I don't think it's going to stop people from buying a larger battery or all-wheel drive or wanting the bigger speakers set, but I do think it speaks to the value proposition that Tesla offers. And that's good because, as I mentioned earlier, at the moment, this does not qualify for the $7,500 federal tax credit, which really just puts it more in line with the rest of the competition. And where previously that tax credit would have made a significant difference to that value proposition, now it really needs to stand on its own. And I think this is enough to do it. It doesn't mean this is what I get over everything else, but it would be a lot harder to say this is the wrong choice. And I think that goes a long way when people are making some of those decisions. Tesla has always gone with a much more minimalist approach when it comes to their exterior and their interior and their business model. What we've seen here in the upgraded, updated, refreshed Model 3 is quite a few small changes that I think are really well thought out. We have a more quiet, comfortable, compliant ride. We see very little trade-off when it comes to overall performance, both in top speed and fun to drive. On the interior, we have a much more premium feel with very small changes. The shapes of the doors are the same. The interior layout is the same, but with some different materials, some different elements, and the addition of that ambient lighting, which is going to be take it or leave it for some. But especially with competition like the Ioniq 6, where the interior lighting is one of its best features because it really helps you make the cabin your own. I do think this is a significant step forward, and with a price that is just about the same as we've seen with the outgoing models, depending on what month you bought it, we're looking at a great update to the electric sedan segment, which is not just small, but probably just going to keep getting smaller. So it's great to see an offering from Tesla that is worth looking forward to if your lease is coming up on a Model 3, or you've decided that it's time to make the leap. If you want to start somewhere, this is a fantastic place to start in the world of electric vehicles. With an updated model comes updated pricing, and this Model 3 is no exception. The starting price for the standard battery rear-wheel drive is going to be $38,990, not including the $1,390 destination fee. Put these together, we're looking at just over $40,000 as the entry price, and for about $9,000 more, you can upgrade to the long-range all-wheel drive version, starting at $47,740, plus that destination fee puts you just under the $50,000 mark. When it comes to options, the Tesla list has always been a little bit limited. You can still choose your exterior color, your interior color, your wheels, and the software package you'd like to go with when it comes to things like the autopilot function. But beyond that, things are pretty set. There are two elephants in the room, and the first one is that there are only 2 models available, not the 3 that there were at the end of the 2023 calendar year. The one that's missing is the Performance Model 3, and while there's been a lot of speculation and spy photos, we ultimately don't know what kind of upgrade we'll be getting with that model, but we have our fingers crossed that it becomes a more compelling performance model to compete with a growing performance electric vehicle option list. The other elephant in the room is a federal one, and in this case it's the tax credit. The current Tesla Model 3 is not eligible for any of the $7,500 tax credit, which is made a little bit more complex by the fact that the bigger brother of the Model 3, the Model Y, is eligible for that credit. What that means for you is that if you're shopping a Model 3 or a Model Y, it's important to know that the Model Y right now, assuming the full $7,500 credit, is less expensive as a rear-wheel drive and a long-range all-wheel drive model than that Model 3. If you're having a tough time deciding between the two, and you're really not sure if it's worth it for the new styling of the Model 3, we do have a video we'll link down in the description below where Alex and I look at the Model Y versus the Model 3. And what I can say is I would probably stick with the Model 3, especially the rear-wheel drive model, just because I like those updates a little bit more. And while we do know the Model Y is expected to get similar updates, we don't have a timeline. And if you're looking at the long-range all-wheel drive versions, you're looking at about $5,000 to $6,000 less for that Model Y, and ultimately it is more car. Let me know what you think of the changes Tesla has made to the Model 3 down in the comment section below. Is it enough to push you towards the Model 3 if you previously had written it off? Or if you are in the market for a mid-size electric sedan, is this now at the top of the list, or is there still something missing that you would have loved to have seen? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, find us on all of our other social platforms, Facebook, Instagram, any of those other social places. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.